Oh, this is already boring the shit out of me. Kill him!
Well, hello there. I'm Papa John, and welcome to my channel. And if you want to join me on my journey to becoming your comic book movie historian, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, that thumbs up icon, and the notification bell as well. And today we are going to be talking about last year, the year 2025, in comic book movies. And just a quick disclaimer, what I personally consider a comic book movie is primarily anything where the characters and or story originated in either a comic book, a comic strip, or a pulp magazine. That being said, I pretty much only include like English language comic books and their adaptations, primarily because even though I do enjoy anime and I love anime, it's not my passion. And if I wanted to include all of that stuff, especially if you get into television, there's just way too much stuff to keep track of, and I just can't do it. That being said, I will include any that are like English language or Hollywood American adaptations of a manga, for instance, which I don't think we really had that many this year or last year. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. And we are starting in January 2025 as we are taking a look at a little animated film called Dog Man. Now, this is based off of the Dog Man graphic novels, which were from the same creators as the Captain Underpants series, which I read a little bit in middle school, but I never read the Dog Man books, even though I read a little bit of the Captain Underpants ones. So I went into this not really knowing anything about it, and it's a decent enough movie. I don't like to be too negative on this channel, and even with the times that I am negative, I want to make it clear that, there are people out there that might enjoy something that I didn't. And this is something that I do think the animation style is done really well. Where Dogman loses me is the storytelling and the pacing. It feels like they're trying to cram in so many comic book stories and adapt to so many stories into one movie that it feels like you're getting a montage through elements that in the books might have been an entire story, whereas here it's just part of a montage. And obviously, like I said, I never actually read the book, so I can't say that's what happens, but that's what it feels like. It just feels like you're montaging through so many things because they're trying to cover so much ground. But, I think it's an endearing enough movie, and the target audience is not a 28-year-old male. And so I think that for the target audience, it works pretty well. But yeah, for me, it's just kind of middle of the road. I do think it's worthy of a thumbs up, but kind of just barely creeping over to the thumbs up side. And we are moving on to Valentine's weekend from last year in 2025, not the one coming up in a week. And we actually have two movies, believe it or not. One of them I did not realize released on Valentine's Day because I watched it months later. Releasing on February 13th was Popeye's Revenge. And yes, Popeye originated as a comic strip. And so I am including the Popeye movies on this list. We have three of them to cover today. That is because Popeye went into the public domain last year. I believe it was last year, maybe the year before. And because of that, we got three Popeye slasher films. And the first one was Popeye's Revenge. This is the most forgettable out of the three Popeye movies, in my opinion, and because of that, to me, it's the worst. This is probably the worst movie that I'm going to talk about today. I really, originally I had it second worst. Over time, it's the one I remember the least about since watching all of these movies, especially after the opening sequence. The opening scene I kind of remember, but that's because they're filming a porno in a cave. But yeah, there's some really bad CGI and just some bad practical work. It's just a bad schlocky, uber low budget slasher film trying to use the popularity of the Popeye character. And I'm someone that does kind of champion the idea of turning kids' characters into horror movie characters. I kind of champion the idea, but you have to do it right. And more often than not, they do it wrong. And this is one of those cases as well. But also releasing on Valentine's weekend, which was a weird release date for this, was Captain America Brave New World, the first MCU movie of the year. This is obviously based off of the Marvel Comics characters. And Captain America Brave New World was one that I was a lot more positive on it coming out of the theater than I am now. But I still feel like I'm more positive on it than most people. But I'm more positive on the Multiverse Saga in general than most people. I still think Phase 4 and 5 are the weakest phases, but I'm still more positive on them than most people seem to be. You know, I think Captain America Brave New World, as it sat on me over time, I've come to think of it more as a necessary evil. A movie that needs to exist just to get us past that Phase 4 and 5 and into this more rebuilding phase that they're doing now. And they fixed. We'll see how it works when Doomsday and everything comes out. A lot of the production issues and all of that stuff that they were forcing out in the Phase 4 and 5. And I think one of the good things about it is that it does feel like a cohesive movie within the MCU. Is the movie itself feel cohesive? Not at times, because you can sort of feel some of the reshoots. But at least it feels like it's actually within the cinematic universe, and it's referencing stuff and pulling things together. Like it's pulling together the Incredible Hulk from like 20 years prior, or 18 years. And it's pulling together the Eternals and just a lot of other things in a necessary way that they needed to do at some point soon. And because of that, I think there is an element to it that makes it necessary. It makes it a more important film going forward, in my opinion, even though it's not as well put together. I would equate this more to like an Iron Man 2. It's not well put together, but there are elements in it that needed to happen in order for the universe to move on to bigger and better things. And then in March, with the digital release, and then the physical release was in April, we got Batman Ninja versus the Yakuza League, which is obviously based off of Batman from DC Comics, and it is a sequel to a 2018 film simply titled Batman Ninja. Now, if you don't know what these are Japanese language anime. The original form is in Japanese language, and the forms I watch is. And I pre-ordered Batman Ninja way back in 2018, even though I have since gotten rid of the disc. I wish I didn't, but I did. That being said, I was not the biggest fan of Batman Ninja. It was before I really got into anime. I didn't really get into anime until COVID lockdown. And so I wasn't really familiar with the anime style. And so I just went into it as a Batman fan, and it didn't really work well with me. That being said, I've heard from various sources that if you go in and you approach it more like watching an anime that Batman is inserting himself into, it works a lot better. I haven't rewatched it since then. That being said, the sequel, Batman Ninja vs. the Yakuza League, I absolutely loved, and I think it's a very underrated gem from 2025. Now, when I went into this, I don't know why, in my head, I thought this was a promotional crossover, just direct-to-video movie between Batman Ninja and the Yakuza video games. I don't know why I thought this was a crossover with the Yakuza video games. It's not, but for some reason I thought it was until I actually hit play and watched it. That being said, like I said, I loved this movie. It has the anime art style, like a CGI anime art style, which I'm not the biggest fan of CG animation in general, but sometimes it can work, and it works here. And it has more of that classic DC superhero Justice League style of storytelling with Batman as the central character, rather than the more anime isekai type of thing they did with the first Batman Ninja movie. And I think because of that, it was easier for me to get invested into it, and I was shocked by how much I enjoyed this movie. Is it the best comic book movie of the year? No. But it's definitely a very underrated one that I think went under a lot of people's radar. So in the first Batman Ninja, Batman got trapped into a time thing, and Batman, his rogues gallery, and Robin and stuff all got transported to feudal Japan. Well, Batman Ninja vs. Yakuza League takes place directly after that, after they return back to the present day. And it turns out their accidental time travel to the past has caused a lot of issues, and now there's a floating Japan dimension floating above Gotham City, which causes it to rain Yakuza members. It's raining men. It's raining Japanese gangsters. And then also, the Justice League members are gone. There is no Justice League. It's just the Batman and the Bat family. Well, that's because of the time rift, the Justice League members all got transported to this Japan dimension and Yakuza dimension. And so now Batman makes his way up into that dimension and realizes that all of the Justice League members are now just like Yakuza bosses and everything. Then the super boss is Ra's al Ghul. And it's just this great story. It's a fun little direct-to-video Batman Justice League story that I think is a lot of fun. And so next we have our second Popeye film, that being Popeye the Slayer Man. Once again, this is a film based off of the now public domain Popeye comic strip. And this is the one Popeye film that I will actually champion. Do I think it's a great film on a technical level and all of that? Hell no. But I do think there's a lot of enjoyment because I'm also a big horror fan and I love schlocky cult classic type of stuff and just fun slashers. And this is a fun slasher in my opinion. And they actually take the Popeye lore with the spinach and everything and they create something creative out of it. You know, there's a reason they're using the Popeye name beyond just simply make the killer look like Popeye, like so many of these public domain horror movies do. No, this one has a somewhat type of lore around it that ties back to Popeye. And I appreciate that. And I just like the look of the Popeye character in here. You know, the other two Popeye films, they kind of CGI his face and his muscles a little bit. Where in this, it's mainly just a practical suit. Yeah, it looks fake, but it's a lot more enjoyable when you have just those practical fake muscles and everything and all of that makeup on. I just think it looks a lot better. And like I said, the story here is a lot better. Like I said, this is just a middle-of-the-road movie. It's not a thumbs down from me, which might be a controversial opinion. It's definitely not a thumbs up. Because if you don't enjoy low-budget slashers, you're not going to enjoy this. That being said, I kind of enjoyed this for what it was. It's not great, but I enjoyed it enough. And now it's time to move on to April Fool's Day, where we got the release of Shiver Me Timbers, the third and final Popeye film from 2025. This was originally the one that I thought was the worst, just because I do think it has the worst overall acting, and just it has the worst CGI. There's a lot of technical elements that it's the worst at. That being said, the writing is a lot more fun than Popeye's Revenge. They're very close. They're very close to just being in last place, both Popeye's Revenge and Shiver Me Timbers. But I think Shiver Me Timbers, the script itself, just has a lot more fun elements to it. There's a lot more, like, you can tell it was written by a horror fan. You know, there's references to, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's references to a bunch of other stuff. So even though I think it's in contention for the worst movie I've talked about today, or I'm talking about today, I'm not going to put it in last place just because I do think it's just a little bit more fun, the script at least, than Popeye's Revenge, which is more of just straightforward, boring slasher with the killer that looks like Popeye. And now we get to move on to the big boys from summer of 2025. And first, kicking it off, we have Thunderbolts Asterix, aka the new Avengers. Obviously based off of the Marvel Comics. Granted, this is not the Thunderbolts team from the Marvel Comics. It's just the idea of the Thunderbolts. Now, this is a movie that I absolutely adored. It shocked me when I saw this in theaters how good it was. I was not expecting much. I was expecting to enjoy it more than other people, and I still think I did enjoy it more than other people, even though a lot of other people love it. I haven't felt this way about an MCU movie since, like, Civil War, maybe. You know, I'm not saying this is better than Civil War. I'm not saying this is better than Endgame, even, because it's not. That being said, in terms of tackling just actual themes that I can relate to real life instances and everything, no movie does it better than Thunderbolts, in the MCU at least. And they're able to do it with, you know, these side characters from other properties, and it's just a blast to watch, but it gets you in the feels, and I like how they're able to find a way to do this more mental health climax without sacrificing the action. by creating this whole other dimension within Sentry's mind and everything. You're able to satisfy the action while also satisfying, the mental health commentary and everything. And I just think it works so well, especially throughout the film when you have U.S. Agent and Red Guardian and obviously Florence Pugh's Yelena. I do wish we got a little more from like Ghost or Taskmaster. That being said, that's just nitpicky stuff that you might even see in deleted scenes. I haven't seen any deleted scenes. I'm probably wrong. Either way, I adored Thunderbolts. That's a big thumbs up, big contender for best movie of the year or best comic book movie of the year. And now we're moving on to July, which itself has 4 releases, but it also starts a string of 5 weeks where every weekend we got a comic book movie. And the one that kickstarted it all was The Old Guard 2. Now, this is a sequel to a 2020 film called The Old Guard, and this is a Netflix original, and it's based off of the Image Comics series, The Old Guard. Now, I was a decent enough fan of the first movie. I didn't love it. I thought it had a very weak villain. I didn't like that Harry Potter guy that was the villain. I didn't like that casting choice at least. That being said, I went into The Old Guard 2 only hearing negative things, and maybe that's the reason why I came out of it a lot more positive than everybody else. Do I think it's a great movie? No. But I had a blast with it, and I actually enjoyed it more than the first movie, because I think it has a more compelling villain and a more compelling arc for all of the characters. I like the story with Quinn. I like the story with Discord. I do think it's a little jumbled at times. Like I said, I don't think it's great. You have some iffy special effects. You have some just general, Netflix original schlock stuff here. That does kind of feel like what it is. Just another sci-fi Netflix original action movie. Straight to streaming movie. But, I had a decent enough fun with it. I'm a big fan of Charlize Theron. I'm a big fan of, I think, Uma Thurman. Overall, I just liked the lore. They actually built the lore a lot more in this movie as well with regards to, the Immortals library and everything. And so just overall, I enjoyed it more than the first movie. Like I said, it's not one of the best films of the year, but I'm a lot more positive on it than everybody else. It's very much a middle-of-the-road movie. And then 1 week later, on July 11th, we got James Gunn's Superman, obviously based off of the iconic DC character of Superman. And this is probably one of the 2 most popular, most talked about comic book movies of 2025. And honestly, on a personal level, this is easily my personal favorite. I don't think it's light years ahead of a couple of the others in terms of technical quality, I guess. But for me personally, this is easily my favorite of the year. My first watch, I had a couple reservations. I was unsure about the Jimmy Olsen story, It took me a little while to warm up to the Kents. But then on my second viewing, I was like, I didn't have any problems with any of that stuff. And then on my third viewing, I noticed a little bit of a problem with regards to just exposition dumping in a specific moment. And I also noticed a lack of backstory for a lot of the villains. That being said, for what this movie is, it's the greatest version of what it is, in my opinion. It still puts Superman front and center, obviously, but you get just enough of Clark Kent in the Daily Planet where it doesn't feel like you're getting cheated out of one side of the character, unlike something like Man of Steel, which I do love, but it has a severe lack of that traditional Clark Kent. And just the overall end of the movie has just this great message about just being a decent human being that I absolutely just adored. It reminded me of classic cartoons. I grew up with one of my dad's VHS tapes of Super Friends. I grew up with the DCAU shows like Justice League Unlimited, Young Justice, all of that stuff. And this just reminds me of a live action cartoon in the best way possible. It might be the most perfect live action cartoon out there at just capturing what a cartoon is in live action. And then 1 week after Superman, we got Smurfs. Now, you might not realize this, but the Smurfs originated in a Belgian comic. And going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video with regards to manga and just foreign comic books, foreign language comic books, I will include those adaptations when it's more of a Hollywood production. Like I said, I will include foreign films as well if they're based off of an American comic book, i.e. Batman Ninja versus Yakuza League. But in this instance, it's the other way around. It's a Belgian comic being adapted by Hollywood, and this movie is not very good. For what it is, for a cartoon, it's fine. I can see little tiny kids getting some enjoyment out of it. It's got some fun musical sequences, I guess, but the animation, for being a theatrically released, presumably big budget animation movie from a big animation studio, the animation sucked. I could pick out little glitches in the actual animation and things that didn't seem to be moving properly, and it's just but those are also things that I will pick up. But a little 3-year-old kid's not going to pick up stuff like that. And I think there's enough enjoyment out of it for the target audience, even though I'm going to give it a thumbs down. The reason I'm giving it a thumbs down, though, the thing that knocked it down a peg was just that the closing title sequence is an outdated, cringy. They're trying to start a TikTok dance trend with the end credits sequence, which just feels completely outdated. That's something that belongs 5 years ago. TikTok dances were a thing 5 years ago. No one fucking cares about them anymore. But luckily, a week after the atrocity of the Smurfs, we got the Fantastic Four First Steps, which is based off of my personal favorite Marvel property, that being the Fantastic Four, obviously. And in contention for my favorite Marvel superhero outside of a team is still probably the Human Torch, which is something we'll get into a little later. That being said, this is a good movie, and definitely up there with Superman is one of the most popular and most talked about comic book movies of last year. And I thought it was a really good movie at capturing the Fantastic Four environment and tone and production design and just design of the characters, capturing Jack Kirby's Galactus and just even the Silver Surfer. There are scenes in that third act, and even not just the third act, but the montage at the beginning that are just strictly pulled straight from a comic panel, adapted almost beautifully to perfection on screen. And there's some great special effects. I know everyone talks about the baby, which was not great, but put the baby aside. Go to that sequence in space. That is some of the best special effects in all of Marvel. And the story itself, I think, is really well written and really good. The thing that holds this back from me from being below Superman and probably even below Thunderbolts is, as someone who's a massive Fantastic Four fan, I don't think they got the casting right. My main issue with the casting is, Vanessa Kirby does a great job individually. Pedro Pascal does a great job individually. But they don't have any chemistry. I don't feel any chemistry between these four people. And they're supposed to be Marvel's first family, this big family dynamic, and I don't feel any chemistry between them all. I don't feel like they're a family. And it's not a problem with the writing, in my opinion, though. It's just that I don't feel any chemistry amongst the cast. And then with Human Torch, like I said, Human Torch is one of my favorite superheroes of all time. I think Joseph Quinn has it in him to be an amazing Human Torch, but I feel like in the direction he was told to play it down. And I don't feel like that helps or benefits the film, and I don't think it helps or benefits the character of Johnny Storm. The actual story itself and the writing is perfectly fine. I love Johnny Storm's story here. He's got a great story. The performance, though, it feels too downplayed. It doesn't feel like he's bringing enough charisma to the role. He doesn't need to be a womanizer to have charisma, because that was the big thing. People didn't want, that womanizer character that Chris Evans did in the Tim Story films, and that's fine. I understand that. I kind of agree with that. But that doesn't mean you have to take his charisma away. But outside of the lack of chemistry between the core cast and the lack of charisma from Johnny Storm, this is still overall a phenomenal Fantastic Four movie. On a technical level, it's easily the best Fantastic Four movie we've gotten. On a personal level, I still might prefer that first Tim Story movie, just for nostalgic purposes. But I do think this is a better movie than that one. But it doesn't quite reached up to the same level as Superman or Thunderbolts for me personally. But I understand if it does for someone else. And then 1 week after the Fantastic Four First Steps, the last in our 5-week stretch in the summer, was The Bad Guys 2, which is based off of a Scholastic graphic novel series. I'm unfamiliar with the graphic novels myself, but I am actually a big fan of the original 2022 film, The Bad Guys. And once again, I think we have here a movie that is a very underrated and kind of forgotten about movie from 2025. It came and went, but it is a great movie in my opinion. It might even be better than the first The Bad Guys film. I really like what they did with Kitty Cat and just how they tied everything together. But the thing I love the most about this is it feels like a Fast and Furious movie with animals. And I'm a big Fast and Furious fan for what they are, and I really enjoyed what they did with this movie. And the thing that I kind of felt in awe about, and one of the reasons I think it's so underappreciated as an animated movie in general, is the actual action sequences here. It's kind of amazing how well they animate the action sequences and everything that's going on in the backgrounds and what the actual characters are doing and everything. There's just so much animation happening that you don't even realize it. That's what I like about an animated movie. Like, a lot of times you'll get these animated Oscar movies that are just sort of great animated stills and great imagery, but they don't have that fluid animated action, which to me is a lot more impressive when it comes to animation, is when you can have that fluid action. And that's what this movie has. And I just really like the character development and everything they did with the bad guys, Kitty Cat. And I got a big kick out of what they did with Snake as well in this movie. And now we're almost done, but we have a couple more movies left. And next we're going to be talking about Red Sonja. Now there's been a Red Sonja film in development for over a decade. I believe at one point even Amber Heard was, before she became a villain in real life, was attached to be a Red Sonja at one point. That being said, we never really got that big blockbuster version we were meant to get, but we did get this direct-to-video version, more low-budgeted version of Red Sonja, which I actually really, really enjoy. It's got a really bad IMDb score at 4, but I just think people were expecting too much. If you go into this knowing that it's just this very low-budget attempt at making a big-budget film, you're gonna enjoy it. It's a good sword and sorcery film that just has a limited budget. The CGI isn't on the same level as an Avatar, but that's because it has significantly less money. And I think they did a great casting with Red Sonja, the main character. I enjoyed all of the side characters. I think the villain in Dragon is really cool, and I really enjoy his story and how it all ties together. And even the CGI, especially for the budget they had, I thought it was actually really good. It's not the same quality as, say, Fantastic Four First Steps, but for what they had, they pulled this off really well. And because of that, I really want to champion this movie by giving it a thumbs up. I think this is a great hidden gem of a comic book movie that people are going to overlook because they're going to misunderstand and not realize the resources that were available to the people that made it. And I think they did a great job with what they had. And then lastly, our final comic book movie of 2025 was Aztec Batman Clash of Empires. Now this is a new Elseworlds take on the iconic DC Comics character of Batman, creating essentially a Batman within ancient Aztec Mexico. And it does this by telling a story around Hernan Cortez's sort of invasion of the ancient Aztecs way back in the day. And I think the story itself is really good. I think there's some animation issues, but like I said, this is a direct-to-video. I don't think DC really gave them much of a budget, and I think it's decent enough on that end. Now, if you watch the English version, it's that the voice acting is not very good. in my humble opinion. But the Spanish version, I think, does it really well. Plus, the Spanish version is the original intended version, so that is the version I will always recommend. I will say, though, it never feels like it comes to a proper conclusion, in my opinion. And then the last, few minutes or so it's all sequel setup. And I know for a fact this movie was never going to get a sequel. This movie's never going to get a sequel. And I feel like the producers knew that, but yet they still went ahead with it. Maybe they were just hopeful that maybe it'll get popular enough that they can warrant a sequel. I don't think it did, and I don't think it, in my opinion, I don't really care if we get another sequel. I enjoyed it a decent amount, but like I said, it's not one of the best of the year, and it's not one I'm really going to recommend to a lot of people, just because I don't know who to recommend it to. And there you have it. Those are all of the comic book movies from 2025. Let me know how many of them you have seen and your thoughts on the ones that you have seen. And I do plan on doing something Oscars weekend where I'll do a little comic book movie award show where I basically show all of my favorite stuff of the year. My favorite movie, my favorite main character, my favorite sidekick, my favorite, supporting non-superhero character and favorite villain and all of that stuff. I plan on doing some kind of award show thing like that leading up to the Oscars that I will probably call the Supers. And so stay tuned for that and hit that subscribe button, the like button, the notification bell as well. Leave your comments on the top-heavy, but still not too bad year of comic book movies that was 2025. Down below, leave those comments. And always remember to stay super, y'all.